Today's guest is one of the most respected figures in college sports, Jeremy Foley. I've actually known Jeremy for about 15 years. I met him in a barbershop in Stowe, Vermont. Really cool. And at the time when I was there, Jeremy, I mean, he had Tim Tebow was in the program, Urban Meyer, like Jeremy Foley was just like an idol to someone who was in, that kept up with sports. For over 40 years, he served the University of Florida with just pure distinction, including 25 years as the athletic director. Under his leadership, Florida captured national championships across multiple sports and became one of the most successful athletic programs in the country. But beyond his titles and trophies, Jeremy is known for his integrity, his vision, and his commitment to building programs that stand up for something bigger than sports. It's such an honor to have him here today. You can't talk about college athletics without mentioning Jeremy Foley. I've been looking forward to this conversation so much. Jeremy, I was just telling one of my friends yesterday who is aspiring to be an athletic director. I was doing this. He was so excited. I just really excited to talk about your leadership legacy and what it really means to build something that lasts. So first off, just thank you so much for taking the time to being here with me today. What does your life look like these days? I mean, you've now retired. You have stayed on with the Gators as the athletic director emeritus. And so, what does your life look like?
Well, my life is nobody's yelling at me anymore, so that's a good thing. I don't have to win any games anymore. But Colt obviously had a great career. I wouldn't have traded for anything, and I was certainly blessed at a young age to hook up with the University of Florida, and it's the only place I ever worked. And so I'm still around the program, but obviously, time has moved on, and Scott Strickland has taken the reins and obviously doing an excellent job there. But I help when they ask me to help, but I've really focused, probably the last 70 years, I've spent a lot of time mentoring young coaches around the country. It kind of happens organically. I don't have a website. I'm not trying to make a living out of it. I'm just trying to pay it forward. I'm doing a lot of leadership development. I consult with a couple companies that do leadership development, and that's really where my passion is. People say you need to write a book and everything. I don't know if I have that in me, to be honest with you. I just like doing stuff like this, to be honest with you. And, like I tell people when I speak to them, if there's one person today that takes a nugget that I say that may help him or her in their career, then it's been a good day. But that's kind of what I've been doing a lot, and it gives me a purpose in the morning to get up. But obviously, you work your whole life. I'm enjoying my life too. I'm going to Vermont, as you and I discussed. I'm going Friday, and I have a beautiful home up there, and I've done some traveling, and I'm going to do some more. But I'm out of the frying pan, so to speak. But I still have my finger in a lot of different things.
Well, I think people hear the word athletic director. I remember overhearing the conversation about a governor and the athletic director for New Mexico, and how the governor, when the athletic director got the role, the governor said something like, "Congratulations, the state of the fate of the state is in your hands." And I think, as I was analyzing that, for us, New Mexico, we have the Lobos. They really are the largest representation of the state. There's no other greater representation of us out into the rest of the nation. And so I think people don't realize the influence and the stress and what an athletic director's responsibility is. Can you talk a little bit more about the significance that an AD plays for an institution and their city, their state, just what it means?
Yeah, well, when I first came to Florida as an intern back in 1976, all anybody in the University of Florida wanted to do is win one Southeastern Conference championship in football. They had never won one. And obviously, football is a huge passion in the South, but certainly in Gainesville. And, they never won one. In 1984, we finally won one. And, 6 months later or 4 months later, it was taken away from us because we had violated, a large number of NCAA rules. And I remember it was a difficult time for the university and difficult time for the athletic program. Coaches were getting fired and athletes were being suspended. And I'm just sitting on the sidelines. I didn't really know what I was watching. But I do remember that the University of Florida, the institution itself, really got its tail kicked in nationally. And, because, and what I didn't realize and what I now obviously realize, and you just mentioned as it relates to the University of New Mexico, is that a lot of times institutions, the athletic program is a window. Everybody's looking through that window. We're looking at us because we're on TV. We're in the newspapers, on ESPN every week. And, college sports is a huge part of the fabric of this country. So, if they're going to look at us, you better run it the right way, and you better be successful at a place like Florida, your head's always on a swivel. And this is not a woe is me. I love my career. I always told some of my staff when the fire got really hot, we didn't have to be at Florida. We could have been some small college somewhere and done the same thing. We chose to be at Florida. So sometimes there's going to be some heat. That's what comes with leadership. But it's certainly incumbent upon you, if the rest of the world, certainly the rest of the nation, certainly the state of Florida is going to be looking at this university through our window of athletics, then I wanted them to see it run well. I wanted to see them. Obviously, we wanted to win as much as we can. We weren't going to ever win as much as to please all our fans, but run it with class, run it with integrity, run it with protecting the brand, making the right decisions for the university, because we're the highest profile representative of that university. Not more important. It's not our fault we're on ESPN every week. It's not our fault 90,000 people come to a game, and we're not more important than the med school. We're not more important than the library, engineering, but we are the highest profile one. So you better do it right.
That's so, it's so cool with what you guys get to do, and just the level of influence that you guys, and I remember reaching out to you, in high school, because I thought I wanted to be an athletic director, specifically because I saw that, the athletes were the role models for the institutions. And I saw, like, if we could get them to live virtuously and, good habits, and, what effect that could have on the rest of society. And I just think that's so great that you were in a role to just mold and help keep these athletes as, good people for society. And so I think the world of athletics, like, it's just,
we certainly weren't perfect in that regard, but at the end of the day, to me, that was the magic of college athletics. Yeah, a lot of magic, competing in Final Fours and, trying to win national championships in this sport or that sport. But you have a chance to impact people's lives. I mean, you have a chance to make a difference, and, were we 100% making a difference and everybody came through here? No, but I guarantee you, and not just Florida, this happens all throughout college athletics. We impact people's lives for their future, and more often than not, it's an incredibly positive impact. So that is the beauty and the magic of college athletics, was being able to change people's lives like that.
absolutely. You know what? I think there's a lot of things about you that really impressed me. One of them being that you were there as the athletic director for such a long tenure that I don't think many athletic directors reach the amount of years that you have reached. I think you're definitely in the top 1% of the ones who remain as an AD for the amount of years that you have. Thinking of all of the stakeholders involved, the board of trustees, or if you guys have regents, to the president's office, to the booster, like, what was your, what was your method to build trust with these leaders? Because you had to done something that kept enough of the stakeholders happy, and they trusted you, that they weren't going to ask you to step down. What is it that you were able to build that with them?
Well, obviously, the old saying goes, you build trust in drops. And, bottom line is, I'm far from the smartest guy in the room, but from the day I got hired at Florida as an intern, I just went to work. People ask me when that time happened in the 80s when we were on probation, and coaches were getting fired and staff people were getting fired. And, it was an ugly time because of our football program. How did you survive, Jeremy? I just got up in the morning and went to work. And I think that if you work hard and you're always transparent, it doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. When you make them, you own them. When somebody asks you a question, you answer it honestly, even if it's a hard thing to answer. What you see is what you get. I used to tell my staff all the time, we're not spinning stuff around here. I couldn't stand spinning news or spinning situations or trying to make them look different than anything than what they were. Just face it head on. And I just think that when you operate that way, even if people disagree with you, and obviously a lot of people in my career disagree with me, or people don't like you because you couldn't do something for them, or you let a coach go that they liked, whatever. I mean, unfortunately, that's part of being in a chair. But I think at the end of the day, I think people trust you because you're just a straight shooter. And, you raise your hand when you make a mistake. You accept responsibility for everything. And, somebody, for instance, We were always transparent with the media. You want our coaches' contracts here. You want our budget here. You want to know what we're here, all right? Because people are going to find out anyway. So I think if you just come across that way and that's what you believe in, I think that's how you build trust. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think enough people do that. I think sometimes when there's a mistake made or there's a failure, what's this mean for me? Or I get asked a tough question, and if I answer this, how could this impact me, my career? And I think when leaders start putting themselves in the equation, that's when we run into problems. So, I never try to do that. Like I said, I wasn't smart enough to do that. I just told people the truth, and I shot people straight, and this is what it is. And things could not, I don't control if people wanted to get rid of me. I didn't control whether there was a board of trustee member who didn't like me or something. I just go back to what I said earlier. I just went to work, and I worked the best I could, as hard as I could. And I tried to do what was right for Florida every day. And, obviously I had a really good career, a blessed career. And, I just think that style is beneficial for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, I just love the integrity of that, of just, be who you are and like show your strengths and weaknesses. Like, if people not hiding any of that. I just love that that's something that I do think that so many people fail to do. When we see that we have a vulnerable spot or something, and we just kind of hide it away, and it's like, people are going to find out. Here's our budgets. Here's our contracts. Here's like just own up to, and then it forces you then to make the right call, because if you're like, I'm not hiding anything, then like I'm going to do the right thing because I know I'm not going to hold this back from anyone. So I think that's wonderful. Can you give an example of when you had a tough decision like that, like as the AD, of when you might have had something that wasn't going to necessarily look the greatest, but you decided to like own it and say, you know what, this is what happened. We messed up and we're moving forward.
Yeah, I don't, I don't know whether it'd be where we messed up, but the toughest situation, the example I'm going to give you was the toughest situation that I dealt with in my 25 years. And, obviously when you're at a place like Florida, there's a lot of things you're dealing with, right? But, and I think it was 2000, we had a freshman football player that got heat stroke on the practice field. And, 3 days later succumbed to that. All right. So here's a 19-year-old freshman that was entrusted to the University of Florida. His parents sent him to us. And, 3 days later, he's no longer with us. And I can just remember getting our staff in the room, and I've seen this happen in other places in the country, and they circle the wagons. How disrespectful to somebody's life to circle the wagons. I remember I got my staff in the room. Whatever has happened has happened. A young man is no longer with us. His parents have lost their son. And so we're just going to tell the world everything that went on that day, what the temperature was on the practice field, how many trainers are out there, what kind of drills he was doing, how much water was out there, just everything we could. Okay. And, people in that situation worry about lawsuits, you're worrying about the wrong thing. Should be worrying about the family. And, we did that, and, a couple of things happened there as we just told everybody the truth. Obviously in those situations, there are going to be lawsuits. It's part of the world. But I will tell you this, because the way we handled it, the way we treated the family, the way we didn't spin anything, honest, as it turned out, it happened. There was no real blame, so to speak. But, we remained friends with those parents for as long as I was the AD. They used to come to Gator games. They're not even from Florida. They're from New Orleans. And so my point is that you got to look when something so horrific as that has happened, to do anything except be totally transparent, even if it costs all of us our jobs, because we were irresponsible, which, as it turned out, we weren't. Who cares? Somebody's lost their life. And so, to me, that is one of the examples, and that wasn't just me, that was everybody in our department. We were not circling the wagons. We were going to be honest with the family, the doctors, the lawyers, the media, the world, brothers, sisters, parents, other members of the football team, tell them what happened. Because what happened, happened.
That's tough. That would be an awful situation to be in. It reminds me of
Whenever.
it reminds me of Bob Iger when he was as CEO of Disney, and they were like opening Shanghai Disney World, and he got the call that there was a boy who had been attacked by a gator, by an alligator in Orlando at their Disney World park, and like again, just same thing. He just wanted to make sure that I think his first thing was to call the family and just like, could you imagine what that was like for their family to go on this vacation and and
Yeah,
just
well, and
address
that's
that.
why when our first mindset goes, we got to protect about lawsuits and things like that. Again, in a leadership role, I think we're missing the point there. That then it's become about us. It's become about protecting us. And here's just horrific things happen. The chips will fall where they fall. But to do anything else except be totally transparent and honest and loving and kind in those situations is being disrespectful to what the horrific tragic occurrence.
I love that. Jeremy, you had a massive staff at the university, and as we all know that it takes a team to make things happen. I There's one thing of like living the integrity and the living it out yourself. It's like what you can control, but it's really like a challenge for me, and I find for maybe other entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs or startup leaders, or I mean, this could be for anyone. It really is. How do you make sure that your staff are the right people, right? We hear James, what's the I can't think of his name. Good to Great. What's Jim
Jim
Collins?
Collins.
Jim
Yeah.
Collins, and it's the right people for the right people on the bus. How, like, what is your go-to make sure you have the right people on the bus, because they are the ones that will be affecting the program and its success, and so it's like you can live it, but how do you make sure they live it?
Well, a couple of things there. Hiring people is not a perfect science. Jim Collins talks about having the right people on the bus. He also talks about if you have the wrong people on the bus, you have to get them off the bus. So there's a reason I'm on the bus. Somebody made a mistake in hiring them, right? Obviously, I did not bat 1,000 hiring people, but I think most important, you got to know who you are and what did you want. I wanted people to know what I wanted us to be. I talked about that probation at 84 for football. 5 years later, we were back on probation because we made the exact same mistakes again. I'm sitting there. Are you kidding me? And in '92, I got hired as AD. And I can remember for the next 25 years, we talked about living our life the right way. And we're not perfect human beings, but we weren't going to cheat to win. We were going to raise trophies with pride. And, if I talked about it one time over 25 years, I talked about it, 100,000 times. That's what was important to us. We were going to treat people a certain way. We were going to value all sports. Obviously football is very important here. It needs to win, makes the money. But something, women's tennis is important here. They've won 7 national championships, and I go right down the list of all of our sports. So I think it's very important when you're trying to recruit people, who are you and do they fit with who you are? We used to say, is this person one of us? Which sounds a little arrogant, but it's not. Florida did it a certain way. New Mexico does it a certain way. You do it a certain way. They need to be one of you. They need to fit. Every time I hired someone that wasn't a fit for us, it always failed. I'm not even necessarily talking about wins and losses. Just it was a bust in terms of our culture. So you try to communicate that when you're hiring them. You try to do the background checks to find out, again, but you're not sure. But here's the deal. First of all, when you're hiring people and they come to work for you, everybody needs to know right from the get-go, this is what this organization is about, and this is how we're going to do things. I used to meet with everybody we hired, whether it was the head football coach and his staff or the greenskeepers, the golf course. I'm not telling them how to do their job. I'm not a football coach. I don't know how to start a lawnmower, okay? So I'm going to respect the job they do, but we're going to do this in a certain way. And integrity, respecting the brand, treating people the right way. And then when they don't do that, you ask them, how do you get them to do it? You have got to call them on it, okay? And I'm not talking about necessarily taking them off the bus at that point in time, but there are certain things that weren't multiple choice to me. I mean, integrity wasn't, respecting people wasn't, teamwork wasn't, excellence wasn't, And so you can do your job however you can do it, and the best way you can do it, and however you've been taught, but you have to do it within those parameters. And when you don't, then the leader has to step in and go, whoa, 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 this is not who we are. And at some point, they have to get that, or at some point, they can't be on the bus anymore. When we tolerate that, And we just say that's okay, and you guys sit wherever you want on the bus, and you're all on the bus, and you're all fine, and you do it great, and you do it poorly, but kumbaya. It doesn't work that way. I think accountability is a lost art in leadership, right? Because accountability is hard, holding other people accountable, tough conversation, conflict, just it's zero fun. So what the easiest thing to do is the heck with it. We'll deal with it later, or that person's okay and he or she's going to get better and we're fine. It's not that big a deal. And then your culture takes a hit. One of the last big hires I made at Florida, I'm talking about maybe a year before I stepped down, maybe a year and a half. Good hire, resume is what it was need to be, was not a fit. And I did not hold him accountable. I don't know why. Maybe because at the end of the career, huge leadership failure on my part. So I'm not sitting here lecturing to people because I've done it myself, and I can see the impact on the organization and the culture when you don't hold people accountable to who you want to be. Your culture is what you allow, is what you create, and is what you allow. Right? So when I'm allowing behavior that's not consistent with our culture just changed. All right. And like I said, it comes back on me, it comes back on the leader to hold people accountable. So how do you get them to do it? Well, you talk about it enough. Hopefully you hire enough people who believe in the same things. And when you have people kind of stray, I'm not going down the hallway turning out lights, but we're going to have a conversation about what the expectations are at Florida. And then it's upon them to get it. It's upon them to get it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what comes to a follow-up question that comes to me, and I don't know if this was Scott Belsky, who's the chief product officer for Adobe, if it came from him, but I always remember someone telling me that you don't really know someone what they're like until you've started working with them. Do you find that's a common thing as well, or would you disagree with that statement?
Oh,
That
no,
you
no,
don't really
100%.
know what it's.
You
They
may.
look like ace an interview.
Yeah. But there also may be some of you hire that you've known forever at another school. You've seen how he or she works, but you still really don't know them until you get in a foxhole with them. Okay.
Yeah.
But, you know, but that's why I'm digressing a little bit here. I'm a big proponent of what I call walk around leadership, because you can't get to know people unless you're around them, meaning dropping in their office. How you doing? Going to get a cup of coffee. Let's go to this ball game together. Let's sit together, whatever have you. You just can't be the 8 to 5 or, 8 to 6 or whatever it is, weekends, whatever it is. To get to really know them, you got to be around them. But 100%, I've made hires of people that I thought were home runs. And when you really get to know them, you're going, golly. And like I said, then you got work to do to try to impact some change. Or you hire someone that you think is going to be pretty good, and you find out they're a freaking superstar, and next thing you know, they're your right-hand person. So, but whoever said that is 100% spot on, in my opinion.
I love that. Thanks for affirming that. And I'm trying to think of the thing that has always impressed me the most about you is that you started out as the intern ticket taker at the university, and you rose up through the organization. I don't know if I've ever met anyone, not that it doesn't exist. I don't know if I personally have met other people in athletics who have not jumped around from school to school. Do you actually have did it just end up working out that way, that you stayed there, or did you have this loyalty to the Gator brand that other, I don't know, people in athletics don't maybe really have with their institution? It's so rare to see someone stay there their entire career.
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, and certainly my career track is probably different than what you see today. There have been others, but not very many. I would say the key thing there, and people ask me this advice all the time. They talk to us about networking and do that. I think a lot of young people today put false goals, not goals, but expectations of themselves. By the time I'm 30, I need to be here. By the time I'm 33, I need to be assistant AD. 35, an associate AD. 38, an AD. Right? And I just what happens if you don't meet those benchmarks? Does that mean you failed? I go back to what I said earlier. I mean, to be honest with you, I never got in the business to be an athletic director. That wasn't I mean, it happened to me. Okay. I mean, I was an interim AD for a period of time and I liked being in the chair, not from an ego perspective, but because I could put my ideas on the table. We could talk about them, maybe impact some people, programs. It wasn't very long, but when that happened, I said, well, and they hired somebody to become the AD. I was the interim AD. I said, well, the next time this job comes up, I'm going to apply for it. And by that time, it was really important for me to be at Florida because I did have a loyalty to the brand. I mean, by that time I'd been here for, 16 years and I loved it. But I would tell people that, I think if you work hard, it really sounds Pollyannish, but if you're the best worker around, somebody's going to notice you. You're going to get more and more opportunities. And there may be a day where that opportunity leads you to another school and then another school, whatever have you. But I do think people hop around too much. I'm a big proponent to, be where your feet are. I'm not saying don't have ambition, but I can tell you a million people, even work for me, that they were here for a year and they're applying for another job. Go,
Was that
whoa,
hard?
what's that?
Was that hard for you when people that you really liked and you saw a lot of potential in then left a year or two later, or just after you've kind of nurtured them and then they
You know,
that hard?
it's it was probably hard early on because sometimes you take that thing personally, and that was when I was younger. It's not personal. It's their lives. You got to respect that. I mean, if somebody came and told me that, I might be disappointed, and then after my disappointment was over, I would do all I can to help him or her achieve what they wanted to achieve. That's part of my job too, is to help people get where they want to go. You know, if they were really talented, I would make it easy for them to leave. I always was a big believer. You don't let good people walk out the door. I would never be anything but transparent to them in terms of the opportunity I had. I would never try to buy anybody. But I think sometimes, as I said, people leave for the grass isn't always greener. All right, and so I think people need to be careful about that. You can still be ambitious, you can still get goals, but sometimes just staying where you're at and being the best you can be probably can be the best formula as well, in my opinion.
I appreciate that. As someone, I'm, 7 years into my company, when someone that I feel like I've really worked with and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's a rock star. And if they ever leave, it's so hard. Like it is hard for me to take it, to not take it personally. And so
Yeah, it's
I,
human nature.
I
Yeah,
appreciate you telling me that it was, at a younger part of your life. And then as you get older, you kind of realize that it's not so personal. I like that a lot.
yeah.
Um, I want to, try to shift over to just a little bit more of, just a little more personal questions with you, Jeremy. I'm curious if what, I see you from afar and I see you as just, I think the world of you. I put you on a pedestal, see all these great things. What would you say is, people who are actually interacting with you on a daily basis, what would you say is like the biggest misperception people actually have about you?
I would think, and obviously others can either agree or disagree with this. Early on in my career, even before I came AD, I mean, I was a hard charger, and it wasn't ambition.
Define hard charger. Define that.
I
Like,
mean, I would run over you if I needed to get the job done. And if you were working for me and you didn't get the job done quite as the way I thought you should, or as quick as I thought you should, or whatever have you, it could be an ugly conversation. I mean, unprofessional, ugly. I tell the story all the time. And when I'm giving leadership presentations, because it's a leadership failure, nobody wanted to work for me. I created a toxic culture. But here's the thing: is, and I read let me see if I can remember the line. Competence doesn't always translate into good leadership. All right, because I kept getting promoted. If you want, nobody wants to look at my bio, but if they did, early on, I kept getting, more and more titles and responsibility and money and, new contracts. Here's this kid from New Hampshire at the University of Florida. And as I said, charging as hard as I could go because I wanted to be good at my job. Like I said, I never even thought about being an AD, but along the way, there was some, shrapnel being sent out, and it's worse. I had a temper, and so thankfully, nobody, I mean, people kept promoting me, never pointed it out to me, but someone who was around our program pointed it out to me. And I finally, because it was important to me, modified the way I treated people and the way I led. I think that if I had never changed my style, um, I never would have been an athletic director. But I promise you, there's still some overflow on that. And again, at other schools, this is who I am. I could be a hothead with officials sometimes. I was competitive. I think as I got older, I kind of tamed down a little bit. But again, that's what I think people, because I really don't want to be that way. I don't want to be perceived that way. I'm not afraid to make a decision. I'm not afraid to stand up for what's right. I'm not afraid to stand up for Florida. I'm not afraid to disagree. But I can do that in a way you're supposed to do it. I can do that. Reasonable people will disagree. I can disagree with you, and 30 years ago that would have been ugly. Today we'll just agree to disagree, and that's the way the world should work. So, but I think that also people that were around me, they probably don't realize how much I care about people and care about the University of Florida. And I think one of the traits of a good leader is people need to know you care about them. It's a basic human need. Obviously, people want to get paid. I get that. People want to have benefits. I get that. That's not what I'm talking about. They want to know you care about them as a person. They want, you know their name. You know their families. As I said, you're around them, not just giving them jobs to do, but just shooting the breeze. How you doing? Did you see the game last night? And whatever. I mean, I just think that's an important part of leadership.
I love that. Going through as you were, you didn't want to, you didn't start off your career wanting to be the AD, and it just happened that way. Did you? For me, I feel like a lot of people, we have someone we look up to. Like, so I constantly, I have like my Oprah DVD tapes here, and I'm like, I try to emulate a lot of those characteristics that I really thought she did really well. Did you have that once you became the AD your first year? Did you have someone that you constantly were like, I want to be like this person, whether it was the championship and the records, or if it was just the person who could just stay calm in chaos? Like, was there someone that you kind of?
It's obvious that incident back in 1984 shaped my leadership style, shaped me as an individual. Because in 1984, when we won that first ever conference championship, and that had it taken away. But at the same time that was all happening, but even before the year started, and the NCAA informed us that we were under investigation, the president of the university at that time, a gentleman by the name of Marshall Kreiser, he talked about a moral compass and a true north. He didn't care what the NCAA investigation turned out. He saw the allegations. He knew some, if not all, whatever, they were true. And he changed our football coach even before the season started. And that was an incredibly courageous decision, incredibly unpopular decision. Here we are, this great football team, everybody loved him, and he's gone. And candidly, again, he should have been gone. I mean, and I don't say that in being not having a heart. If you represent an institution like this, we talked about the window. And anyway, so I watched this gentleman just get skewered, never wavered, not insensitive to it, not meaning he would engage people. He would tell people the reasons why. He never wilted. People wanted him to change his mind, didn't change his mind. He did what he felt, but also in the end was right for Florida. And I will never forget that. I was on the sidelines. He's a guy that trusted me in terms of every once in a while, even though I was an associate AD and not obviously on the front lines like the athletic director was, to run some things by me or to include me in some conversations. So I knew what was going on, but his courage under fire is something I always try to emulate. It's tough. It's tough sometimes being in that chair, and it's tough to be skewered. It's tough to get criticism, and again, that's not a woe is me. It's just sometimes people get in that chair, and even myself when I first got into it, it was all new to me to get that type of criticism, or when I made a decision people didn't agree with. But he was always my role model on that because, like I said, his moral compass was right where it needed to be.
Oh, that's such an attractive characteristic to see in someone. That's awesome that you got to like just watch that from afar and kind of learn and pick up on those little those traits from him. That's
Yeah, it was an incredible learning experience, and like I said, changed my life. And at the end of the day, I tell my staff, we make decisions that we think that we believe are in the best interest of the University of Florida. And if they're unpopular, and for whatever reason they meet the anger of decision makers, whatever have you, you can always go out with your head high because you made a decision that you thought in your heart was right for the place that you work for. All right. And again, people will disagree. And I respect that. And I tell this also, I never wanted to get fired at Florida. I mean, I love working at Florida. I love living in Gainesville. I love my job. I love my house. I love the people I worked with. But I was never afraid of that. I was never afraid of that because I was always going to try to do what was right for the University of Florida.
I love that. Jeremy, we're approaching time here, but I have two more questions I would like to ask you, then I'm going to let you go. I find as I'm, now in my 30s, I'm realizing there's a lot of, periods of desolation and consolation that occur in people's lives. There's sometimes that, it's just a really dark, you feel kind of abandoned, you feel, you're not in a necessarily a good place. And then there's the consolation phase where, your life's great, things are moving the way you want it to move. What has been the longest desolation period for you in your career or in your life? Was there a period of your life that you just, whether it was a month or maybe 3 months or maybe it was just a week of just desolation where you just were like, you just felt defeated or you were just in the dark hole? I'm curious what experience, what caused that for you?
When I got hired as AD in 1992, Coach Spurrier had been hired in 1990. So Steve and I worked together for, I guess, 10 years. He left in 2002. And, when Steve was our football coach, he's the golden child of Florida. He's the Heisman Trophy winner and obviously one of the greatest coaches in the history of the game, national championship. We talk about winning one SEC championship. He won 7, and he won the first one ever that counted. And then when Steve decided to step down, I hired a guy that was a friend of mine, had worked with us, and Ron Zook, and Ron did an incredible job for us when he was here. And it didn't work out, unfortunately, the way I envisioned. But that 3-year period, like I told you before, I had never been, subject to such criticism. Fortunately, there wasn't Twitter back then, but there was chat rooms and there was email, and it was like all new for me. And it's also a great leadership lesson because I totally wilted. It totally. I just talked to you about, I still try to do the right thing, and I watched this president not wilt and stand under fire. And first time I got fired on, I just totally wilted. I've always liked life. But I like life. I like to have fun. I like to, go to music. I like to be around friends. I like to go out, restaurants, whatever. I just became a hermit. And, it was about a 2-year period, right? And I didn't walk around hang dogging, but I was not myself. And eventually, but because I was tired of being that hole, I just pulled myself out of it. I said, what are you doing, dude? You work at the University of Florida, and, Ron Zook's a good football coach, and he was a really good recruiter. He just wasn't Coach Spurrier. And, he recruited all the guys that Urban, not all, majority of them that won a national championship under Urban. Okay. So I decided we're going to help this guy win. We're going to be, I got my staff together and said, hey, let's go, and totally became the guy I was again. But for a period there, and that's, again, great leadership lesson is that, and I had never been exposed to it before, and I'd been an AD by that time by about 10 years because I'm riding Coach Spurrier's, coattail, so to speak, when it came to football. And if you want to sit in a chair one day, you're going to make tough decisions, tough hiring decisions, and people are going to disagree with you. You better thicken the skin up because it's going to happen. It's part of it. Not the fun part for sure. But, I had a lot of people around me at that time. I had a great staff. I have a strong faith. But also, who wants to live their life like that? I told you before, I didn't have to be the AD at Florida. I go be the AD at high school somewhere. I liked being at Florida, and I was going to fix it. I was going to go win. And it didn't work. So we fixed it. We hired Urban and won 2 national championships. So, but yeah, it's you have to expect those days. That time period may have been a little long, but you also got to realize I was in a very high position where people had access to me all the time. Emails, meetings, at games, you walk through the stands, you're getting input, so it's always there. So you know, like I said, I learned a lot from that. I never went down that rabbit hole again the rest of my career, but I had to go through that to learn how to handle it.
Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing that. That was such a delight to hear. Like 2 years is a significant amount of time for that as well, and so I think that's can offer some hope for some people who might be in a month or a 3 month period, and kind of just have some that they're not alone in that. I think a lot of us when we're in that desolated phase, we feel like we're the only one that experiences this, and so
No, no, we all go through it, and obviously, I don't. My life's great. I don't have to make those decisions anymore. But I was speaking to some college athletic directors the other day, and the college athletic world is hard right now with transfer portals and name, image, and likeness and lawsuits, like you read about. And the only advice I can give people then, and like I can give people in the situation you're dealing with, I've run a couple marathons, and the way you really run a marathon is you keep putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually you're going to finish. You're going to come across the finish line.
I love
You
that.
got a lot part of it. You keep putting a foot in front of the other, you're going to finish it. So when you're in those holes, I just kept, even though I was going through a tough time, it's not that I didn't go to work. It's not like I didn't laugh around my staff. I didn't try to be encouraging and try to be supportive and do my job. But it wasn't really obviously hadn't been what it had been the years before that. And the way I got through that was just one foot in front of the other.
I love that, and I think that's just so important to remember and so true. My last question to you, and I asked you this question the last time we spoke, and so I'm curious to hear what your answer is now. What is your current Mount Everest in life? What is the mountain that you are trying to climb? You're retired. You have amazing homes in Florida, Vermont. Like, what is that the mountain you're trying to climb now?
I love the question, and it may not totally is not totally a mountain, but when I first transitioned out of being an AD, and I was fortunate enough to still be around Florida, and when they needed my help, I was there. But at the end of the day, I still get to go to the games, and get to be a fan, all those type of things. But I missed having a team. I missed having a team of people I could go to work with every day, and we were trying to get things done. I missed that, solving problems, dealing
Playing
with.
dragons.
What's
Yeah,
that?
playing
Just
dragons. Yeah.
yes, I missed being around them. Not that they weren't still my friends, but it's different. It's like, I mean, so I was trying to find my way. And again, I'm not the only person who's retired had to go through that, but it's kind of organically. And I mentioned earlier, a guy that I know who's a head coach called me and wanted to discuss some things with me. And he said, "Can we do this once a month?" And I said, "Yeah." And so I knew his agent, and I said, "If you got any more guys who just want to talk," like I said, I don't have a website, and I'm not a consultant. I'm just trying to help as many people as I can. So the Everest that I want to climb is I'm trying to help as many people as I can before there's a day, unfortunately, will come for all of us, me sooner than you, is that, who's this guy? What did he do? I mean, time marches on. Tim Tebow played here, 17 years ago or 16 years ago. I stepped down now almost 9 years ago. But I do think, and again, I don't have all the answers, but I sat in a chair for a long time and hired some really good coaches, was around some really good coaches, hired some coaches, didn't work out. I have some thoughts on why they didn't work out. And so my point is, I think I can help people. I like helping organizations, trying to make them better. So little by little by little, and maybe not the exact same thing, I've constructed a little bit of around the country teammates, right, who I'm just trying to help get better. And so Mount Everest is that I want more of them, and I want it to happen organically. And again, every Sunday I ask the good Lord to send a few more my way, and He's been doing that. So that's what I want to do. I just think that, as again, if you can help one person in their journey, one person who's in that hole you just talked about, get out of it, know they're not alone, like you said, somebody how to handle the wrong person on the bus. I've done all that. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And like I said, it may not be a Mount Everest, but I think it's important work, and I enjoy doing it. And like I said, it gives me a reason to get out of bed.
Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time. It's just such a treat. I'm just so excited for you in this phase of your life. Like, you have earned it. You have done like
Thank you.
you can look back at all of those. I mean, to say that Tim Tebow was there 16 years ago, and like all of those things that you just have done for years and years and years, and all those headaches and all those whatever, all the accomplishments and all the losses, like you earned it. Like you earned to have a peaceful next chapter. So I hope
Well,
that
I
you find that
appreciate that.
peace and that you keep that joy and keep that synergy going with people. Absolutely, we're all meant for communion. We're not meant to be alone. So I hope that you're able to keep slaying dragons with a group of people. So,
I'll do
Jeremy,
that.
thank you.
I'll do that. I enjoyed being with you, Colt. And just one last comment, all those things you talked about and all sometimes the stress and, decisions and, fire and whatever have you. It doesn't, world doesn't work this way, but I would do it all over again if I could. I loved every second of it. I was blessed. I loved every second of it.
I love that, Jeremy. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time. We'll chat again here. I'm hoping later this year, something else, and we'll.
I'm here to help.
Yeah, let me know if there's anything I can do for you. All right.
Colt, enjoyed being with you, my friend. Take care, buddy.
Thanks, Jeremy. Bye.